Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, the Suns have been linked very strongly to a point guard at number 22 in the NBA draft. Does that point guard fit? Is that the place they should be looking in the draft? And does this mean they're making the pick? We'll talk about it all next.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Brendon Kleen, your host, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons and the host of the Just Basketball Show. Thank you so much for making Locked On Suns your first listen to kick off your week. We're free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. We're here every day. All you got to do is hit the button, follow, or subscribe. You get a new episode in your feed Monday through Friday, all off-season long and beyond into next season. Please do so. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto the team right here with me each and every day. Joining us as he does every Monday is Brandon Dueñas, a writer over at Bright Side of the Sun. We have some draft news to get to, which is fun. Been a while, to say the least, since I was even, June 16th talking about the draft, frankly, Brandon. But here we are, and the rumor is that Tyler Kolek from Marquette started his career at George Mason, transferred, 4-year player, point guard, if this report came out the day before the draft, I feel like we would have just been penciling in the pick at this point. That's how strong it was. So we'll get to that. Wanted to let everybody first about PrizePicks, the sponsor of today's episode, and the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Brandon, let me read you the report from Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype, and I'll just let you give us your read and your feel for the player that is named. He said, there's a growing belief from rival NBA executives who spoke with Hoops Hype, and this is in a mock draft that he put together, that Phoenix will target Marquette point guard Tyler Kolek with the 22nd overall pick. Reactions to how strongly worded that is, reactions to Kolek as a player, what do you got for me?
Yeah, look, if you could create a player in a lab and give him traits that James Jones would like, being 23, a shooter, high IQ, low ceiling, I did the air quotes for those who can't see, with more of that safe floor type of bet. Like, he fits all those boxes. So to me, the link makes a lot of sense. Like, are they going to make that pick? We'll talk about later. But to me, if they make this pick and they keep this pick, he makes the most sense. And on several fronts, like he checks a lot of boxes in terms of what they need. There's definitely some concerns, which we'll get into about, the size. How is he going to adjust to the NBA game in general? Like that's the main thing is like if he can seamlessly translate his game across NBA, like it is built to where I think he could be a useful contributor and role player that the Suns have been linked to, like the TJ McConnell type prototype players for several years, and like they've never got him. So this could be their way of maybe trying to address that without having to sacrifice too much.
To me, look, he's pretty perfect. I agree with you. And just kind of going down what he's good at, what he's bad at, what they need, what they already have, I could see him being the 8th man on this team next year without too much of a struggle at all. I think that fully makes sense. Now, nobody's a lock to translate, but obviously, as we've seen with James Jones's mentality on this, as you rightly addressed there, like, it's a lot easier to imagine a player translating when they're 22, 23 than, a freshman. So that's why Derek Lively's getting all this attention during the finals. That you don't see a raw center, for instance, do that very often. But an older point guard, yeah, you do actually see that quite a bit. So I think it makes perfect sense. I think, to me, in terms of those types of players, in terms of James Jones guys, he's also feels a lot closer to a Cam Johnson than a Jalen Smith, and obviously Smith was younger, was only a sophomore and everything else, but he just feels like exactly the type of guy. Even I don't care about the Suns part of this for what I'm about to say. If I was just going and watching Tyler Kolek film, or I heard about any other team who was a lock to pick him, and I was just curious why or what's his game up, whatever, I would think, oh, this is probably one of those guys we're going to look back on in 2-3 years and say, wow, that role player probably should have gone higher. He just feels like that type of guy. I watched a video from College Scouting on YouTube. I think that's what the channel's called. And they have some of like the synergy numbers in their videos. He shot 60% at the rim this year, 97th percentile as a catch and shoot scorer. Those are both things that you feel good about translating. He can pass off a live dribble pretty well. Like, I know you mentioned the strength, and I'd love to get into that. To me, like, he's pretty, or you mentioned the size. His strength to me is a little bigger than 6'3" frame would typically indicate. I feel good about that. I just feel like he seems about as plug and play as a player could be, especially if you're just trying to be realistic about what the fit is going to be. Not, it's 22, guys. We're not talking about the second overall pick. If you tell me the Suns at 22 get a player who I feel this good about, I feel like I'm walking away from draft night pretty happy.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the quote-unquote worst draft in NBA history, which kind of works out for the Suns in a way, because I think whenever that happens, they're usually talking about the top end of the draft, where usually useful role players like Tyler Kolek could drop. So I think that kind of works in their favor with where they're picking. There's probably going to be a few guys that can fit that mold of quote unquote plug and play, which I'll keep saying quote unquote because there's no such thing as like a sure bet. We've seen point guards in the past that sound decision makers, super high IQ. Like, I think a lot of people, just from what I've read about him, have raved about how smart he is and how he dissects defense and knows exactly what coverage he's facing pretty much every time he brings it up the court. So I think one thing that plays in his favor is his ability to mix up the pace, where he could push the pace when he needs to, but also he could play in the half court, which to me, that's a playoff rotation player. Because if you can adjust to both scenarios where you can pick apart a team in the half court and also get out and run transition and make great decisions, that's where I think a point guard, just having that, he could play off ball too, don't get me wrong, but I think
that's what I was just going to say, right? Like, that's another thing that makes you feel better about his ability to translate, is that he's not one of these guys that was just eating possessions, high usage, just doing everything, and then they're going to come into the pros and they don't know how to adjust. He can shoot. That helps. That goes a long way.
Yeah, and he's got that lefty stroke, some Goran Dragic flashbacks a little bit with some of his finishing too. Is a little crafty. So I've seen McConnell, I've seen Pritchard, I've seen Goran, I've seen all kinds of stuff. So I don't know.
Love Kevin Connor's work on the draft. He has Brunson in there. Let's not get carried away. That one made me laugh. I'm like, yes, he's a lefty, but that guy got MVP votes. Let's maybe chill, But for sure, my comp was Tyler Johnson, another lefty. That came through Phoenix. That's kind of the vibe he gave me. A little, I guess maybe more of a traditional point guard than Tyler Johnson was, but also like 15 pounds heavier than Tyler Johnson. So not 1-to-1, but that kind of craft, the shooting stroke, that's who I thought of. But yeah, it's a fun game, especially with the lefty handle for sure.
Yeah, and he led the NCAA in assists this season. He's had multiple years in a row at 7 assists, which, and with how slow the game is compared to the NBA, like that's like equivalent to like 9 or 10 assists in the NBA. He's hit like 39% from three this last season and 38 the previous season, so at a high volume. So I think his ability to distribute the ball and shoot at a higher level, those are kind of two of the biggest needs of the Suns at this point. So that's like, just in general, just looking at the Suns roster, all their role players, it feels like they do one thing well, and if that thing's not working out, they're in trouble. So I think if you can get a guy that addresses, that's kind of why I alluded like a Chris Dunn, where you have his point of attack defense, but also you can handle the ball. Someone like Kolek who can play that point guard and kind of slow things down when they need to and take control, but also knock down shots and play pesky defense. Like, those are the types of role players I think they need to prioritize instead of just looking for strictly specialists or guys to fill one need. I think Kolek kind of hypothetically could fill a couple needs at once if his game does translate how we think it might.
Yeah, I think speaking to his size and everything else too, kind of the physicality of his game, I feel like, 4 rebounds last year per game, 5 this past season. That's pretty nice just in terms of numbers, and kind of speaks to the the well-roundedness of his approach to the game. I guess let's jump to his fit, because I think fit in the NBA a little bit more, fit with the Suns a little bit more, fit versus their other options a little bit more as well. Coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, the best place to find a job, which makes it the best place to post a job as a small business, because LinkedIn knows that when you're hiring as a small business, you want to find quality professionals right for the role. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find those professionals for your team faster and for free. Better than anybody, taking that responsibility, that burden off of your hands. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, making it the best place to hire. They do all of it for you, making the process easy and intuitive. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate from LinkedIn within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows you're wearing a ton of hats. If you're a startup CEO or somebody trying to add to their team that's a little lean, LinkedIn helps find ways to make the process easier. Join the 2.5 million small businesses already using LinkedIn for hiring by posting your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Brandon. So when I think of the fit here for Tyler Kolek, just read the stats again. You mentioned a few of them. I probably should have said this at the top. 15 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds per game, over a steal and a half per game, shot 50% from the field, 55% from 2, 39% from 3, and 85% from the free throw line. The free throw numbers through college make me feel even better about his three-point ability, but even then, 2 years, junior and senior season, shooting around 39-40%. You got to feel solid that we know who he is as a player, right? That goes a long way. It's not a guessing game. You're not picking some raw freshman like, at the top of the draft, somebody like Alex Sarr, who, of course, has way more talent than somebody like Kolek, but hey, we've seen plenty of drafts where a player like Kolek or a couple of the other guys we're going to talk about that are going to be in the mix at 22 end up having better careers than those guys. So you can see why somebody like James Jones likes that. You can see why for the Suns, that certainty would go a long way. But as far as fit with the Suns, how do you think he mixes in with this roster? Playing with the big three, playing off the bench, what the pieces that they might need to make Kolek look better, why they might look a different direction. How do you think he fits on this team, given that now we both have established we feel pretty good about him as a player?
Yeah, I think for the most part he could fit along any side of the big three, whether it's leading a second unit with one of those guys, playing in like a staggered lineup, or playing together with all three of them, depending on who the big is. So I think that fits pretty seamless as far as just personnel goes. But when it comes to his role, like, it's just going to be that standard, typical backup point guard that he's just a pesky guy that comes in and annoys the hell out of another team for 15 to 20 minutes every night. And that's exactly what they've needed for a while now. And it feels like even when they have that starting point guard, that's always just been almost like a dark hole. Like, Campaign had a good stretch, but had his ups and downs as well. So I feel like getting someone that's consistent is huge for a second unit, because if you know what you're going to get every night, and he's going to come in, and obviously with a rookie, it's not going to be like that right away, but I think ideally he gets there eventually, and just for a long-term fit, that's just the role I envision him playing. And Gambo's reported of like the three things they're trying to acquire. One of them was a point guard that could play 20 minutes. While that might be for a team trying to win championship, a rookie kind of feels like it's working backwards. He's one of the few that I feel like could probably step in and do that. And you're not doing yourself any favors by just not considering it if you're the Suns. So I think they have to weigh all options and figure out what's the best course of action, and where, like, just from a resource standpoint, like, they have to nail this pick, or whether it's keeping it or trading it. So I think someone like Kolek can contribute right away, and that's why it makes sense.
Yeah, definitely have thoughts on keeping versus trading, and a point I want to make there, but we'll close out on if this rumor changes how we feel about that to close out the show. But as far as, I guess, to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, two things that I would worry about kind of. It's all relative. I think he's a pretty high floor prospect. Like, to put it a different way, you mentioned some guys will flame out. Of course, that happens. I mentioned Sarr and him being an example of a kind of high ceiling, maybe a little bit of a lower floor type player. There's those guys in every draft. There's those guys across the league. Kolek, to me, like, he's going to have a long career, and even if it's in the G League or overseas, right? That's kind of, you can kind of solve contributing in the NBA or in pro basketball to a degree if you can do a lot of the things he can do and you stay healthy and all that stuff. But in the NBA and for the Suns, two things I would worry about are he's going to be exploited, he's going to be attacked, he's going to be relatively a weak point on defense kind of no matter what, because he's only 6'3", he doesn't have a plus wingspan, he's not a freak athlete, he's strong for 6'3", he's not strong like, Chris Dunn, who you just mentioned, by any means, so he's going to be exploitable there. And then this might sound a little weird, but watching some of the Marquette highlights and the breakdowns that are out there that different people have done, they actually spread the floor pretty well. And there's 4 shooters and usually a roll man. So one, let's remember, the Suns don't currently have that roll man, really, at least a good one. They have Eubanks. We all know how that went. And then, is every lineup he's going to be out there with, especially if he's coming off the bench, going to be as spread as you would think? Floor spacing will always be better for a pro team versus a college team, but I guess I'm just worried with what we saw with the Suns and the 3-point issues and everything else. We hope Bud does that, but what happens in a world where defenses are just selling out to say, we're not going to let this rookie just dance around the floor. We're going to take it to him. We're going to clog the lane. We're going to do this and that. I could see him, having a learning curve there. But question is, I guess, with all of those things said, Brandon, we've heard about Khalil Ware and Day'Ron Holmes. We've heard about Yves Missy, Zach Edey. Those are all big man prospects. There's wings like Tristan Da Silva or Bobby Clintman, who have not all these players have been linked to the Suns, but we think they may be there. Jalen Tyson is a wing, another wing who we know they've worked out, who there continue to be some connection, rumors to there. Do you like the idea of a player like Kolek versus any of those other options or any of the other guys that might be out there? Is this the way you would go, given all of that?
So I'll start with this. I think centers, just looking at the free agent market, are the easiest to find right now, and even via trade. So I would put a point guard over a center on my draft wish list. So I think even though some of those prospects you could talk yourself into for sure, and to me, I'd rather have Kolek just because I think you can go get, whether it's trading for a Nick Richards or a Drummond or getting a vet min guy that's can come in and fill that role. But when it comes to the wings, like a Da Silva, there's dudes out there that I think sort of fit that ready to play mold too, where I wouldn't be mad at it. I think Kolek's pretty high on my list. If he's there at 22 and they're keeping the pick, to me, he feels like the no-brainer. Just looking at some of the point guards too, there's not too many that can do what he can do hypothetically, just in the free agent pool. So yeah, to me, I think he'd probably be at the top of my list if just looking at their other options. There's a chance someone falls to them that they weren't expecting. There's always that chance on draft night, you never know. But yeah, to me, just on the surface, big picture, Kolek would have to be pretty high up there. And I think the spacing issue is a good thing that you brought up. Even though NBA spacing versus college, NBA is always going to win. It's always, there's more spacing, but the type of spacing it's going to be with the Suns' current personnel, that is a good point to bring up team fit. So I thought that was interesting, and that's why I think
it's sort of, I agree, and we all there's a lot of people who, when you look at a prospect who struggles in a crowd, then you use the opposite point of what I'm making to say, okay, well, they're not going to have to deal with that quite as much. But I guess just watching them, he did feel like a guy who, again, being a senior in college, I don't know the ins and outs of their team and all the transfers and everything, but it just sort of felt like he had a mastery over, I'm going to have the ball. We're going to run this stuff. I know what my big man's I know where my big man's going to be, how to deliver him lobs. I know there's going to be shooters everywhere. It just, that comfort level is just not going to be there. So maybe comfort and, I guess, the advantages he had being older is maybe more of what I'm saying won't be there in the NBA, but spacing
I look
is just
at that
part of
as a
how
positive.
how they'll play out.
I look at that as a positive too, because like, while yes, he has that comfort right away, he also built that, and I think high-level players that are super smart can do that, and that's not like a given. I mean, even like obviously there's going to be some players where it doesn't translate, and the system was just built perfectly for them in college. But I think with the way he plays, it's pretty seamless transition. So to me, like, he will get to that comfort level. I think in the NBA, it's just going to take some time, and he's going to take his lumps, and just the athletic adjustment too. Just pure athletes in the NBA it's a different animal than college. So there's going to be that learning curve for sure. But I think
Dragic, Pritchard, McConnell, none of those guys contributed as rookies, right? So it takes some time sometimes. So I guess not contributed, but they weren't every day relied upon difference makers from the very beginning. So, but yeah, I guess like I think a center is a more risky proposition in the draft period. You know, you're talking about somebody like Zach Edey or somebody like Yves Missy. I guess my read on it has kind of been the more attention. I know Day'Ron Holmes is still getting mocked toward the end of the first. I just think with how much Lively's impacted things and the way that position is getting valued, too many straight MVP awards to count now have been given away to big men, that I'm kind of just feeling like all of those types of players are going to be valued a little more highly. I think the Suns are going to be more in that third tier of big or so rather than the second. I get a little nervous. I think if they got a wing, I could see myself feeling good about it. I talked about Tyson last week. He seems fine. De Silva seems fine. But I guess, look, this kind of takes me to the way I'm looking at the trade versus not trade, because I think that's kind of all in the decision that they're making. So let's just jump there, talk a little bit about the big picture of what this rumor might mean, and tell us about the Suns heading less than 2 weeks now into the draft. So we'll just get to that coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by PrizePicks, the best place to play daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. Make a PrizePicks lineup in as few as 60 seconds, picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're locked in. Watch the money pile up. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week. They lower stat projections to a better place on Tuesdays to give you an easier chance to win, and then you get your entry fees back if you don't win every Friday. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million daily active users for a reason. So get on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. The finals mean more at PrizePicks. Game 5 coming up on Monday, and so do the star players. You get boosted payouts on select stars that you won't find anywhere else. There's always action on PrizePicks, and June is the perfect time to join. Esports bonuses every Wednesday and Saturday and more throughout the month. Plus, when the finals wrap, the WNBA keeps going with established stars like Brianna Stewart and Asia Wilson, as well as the rookies like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, who just faced off on Sunday when we were recording this. Download the app now. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA when you do to make your first deposit match up to $100. That's PrizePicks, the app, the website, promo code LOCKEDON. Get a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, Brandon. So I'll just get to what I was alluding to there with the value at 22 versus the other types of players. They can get everything else. I think the point that I've been trying to make, that I think I've figured out a way to say, as we've talked about trading the pick versus not trading the pick, and I know we've kind of been on different sides of that a little bit. To me, it's not always a sure thing that trading the pick is more of a win now move than keeping the pick and taking a player. And I think that's the mindset that I'm trying to communicate when I say I'm not necessarily on board with full-on trade the pick no matter what. And I think Kolek is a player that I could easily see having, even as a rookie, just as big of an impact as somebody that they could get if they traded Royce O'Neal or Nasir Little and the 22nd pick for some player. I mean, let's just use Nick Richards, who you said. They don't play the same position. It's hard to be a one-for-one. It wouldn't be crazy to me if Kolek was just as valuable to the Suns next year as Richards. And So why give up stuff and do all that if you can just get a player like that right from the jump and figure out your other needs a different way? That's kind of where I'm at, and Kolek is a perfect example of it.
Yeah, and I think to your point, there's also just value in general of having that cheap contract, like rookie contract that's a rotation player. Like we've seen contenders, it feels like every contender has one at this point, like besides the Suns. So there's definitely value in that, just roster building. I think the more I think about this whole draft process, I feel like the 2031 pick is gone. I think that's to me that pick was traded. It's done. Like just don't get attached to it with those quotes about we're not in it for seventh graders from the front office. Like I think that pick's gone. The more I think about it, like I feel like the 22nd pick, I don't think it's a sure thing they trade it, and I think it could be the right move to keep it unless they get something that's worth their time. So I think they have to do their due diligence and just figure out if there's a trade that makes them better. And like you said, there's no guarantees either way, but if there's something they think is worth their time to trade the 22nd pick, or their player they wanted or players they wanted are not there at 22, and they just want to flip it for more assets, then that to me that makes sense. But you don't just trade it.
So I convinced you. What you're saying is I convinced you.
I'm definitely not opposed to trading it. I think there's a stronger possibility that they keep it than I did maybe a month ago. But like I said, 2031, that pick's gone. I would put a large sum of money on that being gone. 22, we'll see. I think you could flip a coin at this point.
Sure. Well, this is that part of why I'm feeling pride is that this is exactly what I laid out when I did my best case scenario thing a few weeks back. I had them trading 2031 to get off of Nurkic and I had it as Grant Williams. I don't, that's just made up, but that structure of attaching that pick to Nurkic to get something and then keeping this pick and selecting a player and then going from there, that is how I've always felt would be the best way to go. And again, it comes back to the point I was just making, that you can get a difference maker and somebody that can be valuable to your team right now at 22. It's the joke we've always made this whole time is James Jones should be picking at 22, not 2 or whatever, like the Ayton trade. I know he didn't make the Ayton pick, but the Ayton pick, the Cam Johnson pick, the Jones Smith pick, it's like we didn't necessarily love all of those every step of the way. I know Cam Johnson turned out great, but at the time it was a question. And even Ty Jerome, they picked him. I guess that's kind of like the Tyler Kolek thing. That didn't work out, but that pick was praised. So that can be just as valuable to you if you nail it as any of these trades. And I think they can kind of do both at once here. The point you made about feeling differently than you did before, to me, part of why I think that is we haven't heard any rumors of trades. Don't you think if Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype felt comfortable enough linking the Suns to Kolek this concretely, that kind of means there's noise out there about the Suns and the draft. If they were really, really shopping this pick, I feel like there would be a dueling report out there saying the Suns are pursuing X, Y, or Z trade target. Maybe not that concretely because, again, it kind of be tampering or whatever at this point, but they want to get a wing with the 22nd pick plus little. Like, we would have that by now, I feel like. So the fact that that's not out there, but we're getting Bronny James, we're getting Jalen Tyson, we're getting Tyler Kolek, to me it's like they're thinking about keeping this pick. Or
I'll play devil's advocate here, and potentially they're trying to build up the 22nd pick's trade value. If they're leaking these things and they're saying that the pick, they want to keep the pick, it could be a leverage play to try to raise the value hypothetically. But that's too much 4D chess without any other rumors attached to it. So I'm just spitballing here, but I don't know. I think there's a very good chance they will keep it at this point, which I did not think less than a month ago.
Yeah. Well, so this is the other thing that it kind of got me thinking about is letting the cat out of the bag too early. I see Kolek on a lot of the media boards, Kevin O'Connor, Jonathan Gavoni, NBADraft.net. I don't know what his name is. I always forget, but that site's good. And they have all of those places have Kolek basically on their big board, not mocking, but the value of what the analysts think these players should be picked at. They kind of have him right around the early 20s, which means the Suns aren't reaching for him. They're also not counting on him to fall, but if I'm a team at 19, why not just take him? If I like him and there's no guarantee he'll be there at 22. So that part would worry me a little bit. It kind of speaks to some of the rumors we've heard about the Suns maybe wanting to move up. I don't really think that's very feasible. I don't think that should be very high on their priority list. All things considered, if Kolek or any of their other guys they like get taken and they don't fall, you kind of just deal with that. But that's the interesting part kind of underneath of all of this to me, is that there's a rumor out there now that a team at 22 is locked into a guy who's supposed to go around the early 20s. That's not exactly a lock to happen, and I don't know where that takes us. But the other, I guess, aspect of it that we can close on is the agent side of it. Mark Bartelstein represents Tyler Kolek, as well as many, many, many players, including other draft prospects. But, of course, if that name sounds familiar, that's because the son of one of the sons of Mark Bartelstein is Josh Bartelstein, who is the president and CEO of the Suns and the Mercury, and was a key factor in why Bradley Beal came here. That's also the agency that represents Royce O'Neal, who they traded for and are going to be negotiating with. I even found this, Brandon. They're also Bartelstein and George R. We'll call him. I don't know how to pronounce the guy's last name. Who also reps Kolek and Royce. Also represents Sandru Mamukelashvili, which is a player that Suns nerds have started to target. So once you go down the rabbit hole, you can't get out of it. But what are your thoughts on another connection between father and son, Suns and Bartelsteins? How are you feeling about that little wrinkle and subplot to it?
Yeah, to me, it's nice to be on it, like have the positive relationship out of agents instead of like them refusing to like be on the other side where it's like, this agent wants nothing to do with the Suns. So to me, I'll embrace that, and I think the fit makes sense basketball-wise, so I'm not really too concerned with it being like an issue or anything. Like I think it's just more of a coincidence because Kolek checks every box that it doesn't matter if you were the agent, Brendon. Like I think it would just be they'd probably have the same feelings, but it is definitely an interesting connection.
I'd love to be an agent. If I became an agent, the podcast would end, just as a heads up to everybody. That would be over. So
understandable.
Don't have to worry about that because I won't even announce it. It'll just be over. I'll just drop it all. Yeah.
See ya. Yeah,
some new host will pop up 2 weeks later, and then you'll know, Brendon became an agent.
Well, we'll get the paperwork started. But no, yeah, I think, and in general, like it's not just zooming out a little bit. Like it's agent season where a lot of these things are going to leak because of agents. So like the information we get, there's always usually some motive, whether it's team, player, agent. Like so that's why it's so hard. Just knowing how some of that back end stuff works is like figuring out who's saying it, why they're saying it now. Like, is this legitimate? And there's a person reporting it. Do they actually have, like, there's stuff that gets lost in translation or fabricated. Yeah. So there's so much stuff to consider with off-season nonsense. I love it.
For sure. It's impossible to know where it starts and where it ends. I think Mike Scotto does a really good job. He has worked his way from, this player signing a 2-way contract and really doing the dirty work. So I believe, when he says something, he doesn't really try to jump ahead and get it first and do all that nonsense. Yeah. It feels like he's reporting stuff that's real. And this is, again, very, very strongly worded to the point where I buy it. That said, part of why I brought it up is like, one, it's just a thing to kind of, pin in the back of your mind as the Suns acquire and get rid of players over time is how much is that connection really there? How much does it really matter? We'll see. But if I'm Mark Bartelstein and I have a friendly front office happening to include my son, and I know they might not get mad at me if I am a little loose with the truth, it sounds really nice to link my player, who's maybe a fringe first-round prospect at the end of the day, to a team at 22, drive his value up a little bit. What I was just saying, that the Suns can't be positive Kolek will be there, well, I'm sure Bartelstein's thinking of it that way too. Maybe 22 is my floor, but if I leak that, well, somebody at 18 might get a little bit of a pep in their step to go ahead and take my guy. That's $500,000 a year on the contract or whatever it is. Sounds great. Let's get it done. So just, you're right. I don't know that. Just like we don't know, we can make a full-on case of a whole other side of this, and there's really no way to be positive. But it's an interesting little wrinkle, and like you said, I'm not trying to make it a negative. the Suns having a good relationship. If you're going to pick any agent to have a good relationship with, he'd probably be really high toward the top of the list. He's one of the most powerful guys in basketball, so it's not a bad thing. But until we see who they actually draft, you got to kind of scrutinize that stuff and who is it benefiting and what's the truth and what's just leverage and leaking and all that stuff. So we won't know that, but again, this was so strongly reported that I felt like it made sense to do a whole episode about. So more analysis of Kolek as a player and all that if this becomes closer to being a reality. But for now, hopefully you got a little bit of a picture of all the different sides of it. That will wrap us up, though. Follow, subscribe wherever you're listening. We'll have more content, draft content with Zach Cohen of Real GM coming up later this week. Steven will close out the week as he always does. Plenty of news and rumors, I'm sure, between now and then. Don't miss it. Read Brandon and Co. over at Bright Side of the Sun. That crew's doing great work in the offseason as well. And we'll catch you guys next time.